So the framework to organize GI, the abdominal stuff, which GI/nutrition organ system. It splits into GI versus nutrition. GI is the gastrointestinal tract from your mouth to your anus. Nutrition are all the other GI stuff that's not actually in the GI tract. So it's not technically GI, it's nutrition. It does metabolism to break down your food, but it's not technically part of that tract that goes from the mouth to the anus. GI splits into upper versus lower. Upper splits into the esophagus versus the stomach. So you have your esophagus and your stomach. Once you're past those two things, you're no longer in the upper GI. You're now in the lower GI, which is made up of your small intestine and your large intestine. Before your esophagus is your mouth and stuff, but there's not a lot of diseases there that's specific to that, so we're not worried about that. These are the two main parts. And when you have a bleed in the lower GI, it's going to be red blood. But when you have it in the upper GI, it's going to be black blood. Because it turns black the longer it stays in your GI tract. And if it's more up in the GI tract, it takes longer for it to get down to the bottom. So when you poop out that blood, it's going to be, and it's black. That means it's probably from the upper GI tract, not the lower. Then for the esophagus, I think two big problems are when the food doesn't go down, dysphagia, and when the food comes up, GERD. Then for stomach, peptic ulcers, aka dyspepsia, aka H. pylori, is the big thing. For the lower bowel, it splits, or for the lower GI tract, it's the bowels. So it splits into small bowel versus large bowel. Small bowel, I think a main problem is different types of obstructions. Small bowel obstructions, which can be like developmental stuff, like intussusception and midgut volvulus. Those are the two big main ones. Or it can be like other obstructions, like a tumor or something. Versus with large bowel, the problem is not mostly obstruction. It's mostly like, there's a lot of stuff, but it's like the more important one. This one's more important. The large has more diseases than small. And the two main types are inflammation versus neoplasia. So inflammation, we have IBD versus IBS, which is more psych related. Then IBD is like really severe inflammation. And then neoplasia is like colon cancer, which is a big thing. IBD is going to split into ulcerative colitis versus Crohn's. More mild versus more severe in my head. Localized to just the colon versus Crohn's actually affects the whole GI tract. The whole thing, not just the colon. Colon cancer is going to split, the main things it'll split into, I say, are the polyposis versus the non-polyposis. In other words, familial adenomatous polyposis colon cancer versus Lynch syndrome, which is a non-polyposis. That's for GI. Now so GI splits into the upper GI tract versus lower GI tract. Upper is just the esophagus and stomach. Lower is just the small bowel and the large bowel. Nutrition splits into the liver versus the fat twins. The fat twins are two organs that are both the two organs that digest fat. So they do the same job, but they do different ways. Bile breaks down the fat first, Then pancreas finishes breaking down the fat second. First versus second, the two steps of digesting fat. So the biliary system has splits into two parts, the bile bladder and the bile duct. But we call the bile bladder the gallbladder. So you're either in the gallbladder or the bile duct. Whether you're in the bladder or the duct, when you have a problem, there's only two problems you can have. You can either have a stone or you can have inflammation. The inflammation is a result of the stone. So when somebody has a stone, a complication of that can be that it leads to inflammation because the stone causes a blockage causes stasis, and stasis always leads to infection. So you can have a stone in the bladder, cholelithiasis, or inflammation in the bladder, cholecystitis. Or you can have a stone in the duct, cholangiolithiasis, or you can have inflammation in the duct, cholangitis. Pancreas splits into exocrine versus endocrine. The exocrine digests fat. It releases enzymes to digest fat. And those two enzymes are lipase and amylase. And lipase is a way more important one because it's specific to fat, because it has lipid in the name. Versus endocrine is not even really GI. That's like reproendocrine stuff because endocrine means hormone. So those hormones are mainly insulin and glucagon. Liver, you kind of split it into flow problems versus function problems. Flow is like blood flow problems, and that splits into inflow problems versus outflow problems, the man in the middle being through flow problems. So inflow into the liver is the portal vein because it's the portal into the liver. Outflow has to do with the hepatic vein because it's going from the liver to the heart. And then through flow has to do with just like inside the liver. So when you have scarring in the liver, like in PBC or PSC, this affects women, this affects men. Then if you don't have a flow problem, blood flow, you can also have function problems. These are problems with the actual liver function. And so there's two types of liver function. It has synthetic function versus metabolic function. The liver can make things versus break things down. What does the liver make? Proteins. What proteins? Albumin and clotting stuff. And what clotting stuff? It makes coag factors, which help you clot more, and protein C and S, which help you stop clotting. So when somebody has liver problems and they lose the ability to make these things, they cannot clot when they want to, but they also cannot stop clotting when they want to. So they have problems with clotting too much and clotting too little. They're completely out of control. And then breaking things down, that's metabolism. Breaking down sugar, fat, and protein. The entire biochem class happens inside the liver, basically, biochem.